us. I've been reading in the morning the scriptures and seeing in the story of the dispersion of mankind who gathered around the great city in the plain of Shinar with its tower, the later called the Tower of Babel. In that story, we can see part of the problem of mankind, and because we have that larger view, we can maybe better understand the problem that we are considering today in every media outlet, and that is race reconciliation and the war to prevent Southern independence, and then the memorials put up by people in the 1920s, often in late 1800s, showing major characters in that conflict, often with reverence and love, even for the cause itself. And in that narrative in the scripture, Moses' record in the book of Genesis, we see why men are divided, and in a way why there is a necessity for there being no unity. Everyone seems to be calling for unity. The story in the paper today, the main bar on page 1, and other accounts elsewhere and other media platforms have officials and politicians calling for national unity and the like. Well, it's impossible to have national unity, and if you do have national unity, it is not under a theory of liberty, not under a theory of dominion, if you will, but rather under a theory of domination. And the domination that we forget is overseeing all of these conflicts is that of the nation itself. That is to say, the state, the modern state. And in our country, in our time, that is the union of 50 states through and into the federal government. So the federal government in our day has erected itself as a kind of deity. And by domination, it controls. It's not controlling by ethic. It's not controlling by affinity, really, or affection. Though through military families and patriots, there is that connection of the noble sacrifice, the noble ultimate sacrifice made on behalf of your beloved country. In that strain of thought, there is, of course, that affinity. But elsewhere, and probably in most parts of the country, there is not that sense of cohesion. Has long gone. It's been gone for decades. The acme, if you will, was probably in World War I, where if you were not a patriot for the war, you were hounded, you lost your business, you were put into jail, and you were treated as a scoundrel. And a similar feeling overwhelmed the American populace as well in World War II. To trace out how that sentiment, the war sentiment, worked in World War I, make sure that you assign yourself Randolph Bourne's essay, The State. And the main argument in that essay is that war is the health of the state. Now, because we have this state, right, in our day, the state is the deity state, the pseudo-deity of the state is the United States. We have a unity by compulsion and by, well, it's kind of one of deceit, but let's just say it's by compulsion and by conviction, right? Everybody believes certain things about its power, which belief is greater than the actual authority it exercises, or it can possibly exercise across the fruited plain with its 50 states and its myriad peoples. And even though they all speak American, we would say they're myriad tongues. There are many perspectives between Yankees and Southerners, for example. It's a stark one between Westerners, the sort of amoral Midwesterners and Southerners. Again, great distinctions to be made there as well. And, well, this is David Tulis, and I do thank you for giving me just a couple of minutes of your time here at Nooga Radio. And it's hard, in a way, to talk about what's happening across the country because there is a shrillness about the discourse, even in the media, which is supposed to be objective. There is just an extraordinary shrillness and a harassing sense. There's this sense of harassment of people, an unwillingness to be fair, an unwillingness to let people make their own points in a news account. We have Nancy Pelosi screaming this morning about how how we should be outraged at officials who are silent about these matters. We want everyone to join in a display of righteousness that we can that the public, you and me, you and I can measure based on how much vitriol, how much anger, how shrill the screaming can be. That by that means we're showing how right and true we are, how patriotic Americans we are, how much we love our country, how we are forbearing, gracious, and good people. We establish our credentials by screaming at other people. Even the media is doing the same thing, and we have to take the Times Free Press and the Associated Press to task for not being objective. And one main way in which there's no objectivity is in the use of the word hate. There is no reasonable cause for an editor not to strike that word in AP copy or a Newhouse News Service copy or a New York Times copy. That all has to be stricken. If you're a subscriber to those services, that the copy editor has to take that out. And that is because you cannot be fair if you label one group a hate group, but don't label another group a hate group. It's a word that cannot be used without there being an editorial function in it, right? If you're a newspaper editor, you're supposed to play it neutral, right? You're supposed to play things down the middle. You let each side have its say. Both sides of a dispute are quoted. Even if the writer thinks one side is completely wrong and wicked and evil, that party has to be accurately quoted and his position presented in its best light. That's what has to be done. You can't present someone's position in its worst light with your language, which of course is against his perspective. You have to give his position in his light with his terminology. That's how you describe. That's being fair. The press does not do that. The Associated Press is particularly bad about this, and one reason it commits this editorial evil, right? It is an injudicious editorial position to have an editorial position at all in news copy, and using the word hate and borrowing from the Southern Poverty Law Center, which is credited by the press as an authority and not as a partisan. This group in Alabama is an extraordinarily wealthy fundraising group living on hate, it is a hate group itself. It has called Jim Dobson's Focus on the Family a hate group. If anyone who does that, any group that does that, simply is laughable. And we can see the level of this shrillness in a story that moved yesterday in the National Banner, and it's about a federal judge in Nashville who gave he's a prominent lawyer and an attorney, Robert Eccles, who gave a donation to a nonprofit organization that has a connection through family members with League of the South. League of the South is not a hate group. Okay? It simply is not a hate group. It is a very well-considered group of mild Southerners. They tend to have a white flavor, but there's nothing wrong with that. Look, we have many groups that have a black flavor. Here in Chattanooga, we have black organizations. We have the NAACP. And no one thinks for a moment that there's something wrong with coalescing around an interest that has, as part of its main argument, racial background and skin color. There's nothing wrong with that. No one thinks a moment about it. But if it's a white person doing it because whites are the majority, and you're in the press, well, you have a duty in your own mind to condemn. And so this story about a $3,000 donation to a nonprofit group called the Mary Noel Kershaw Foundation makes this former judge just to look like the most awful person, Robert Eccles. And this group is involved in self-defense, firearms training, just like the Johnny Appleseed organization that Ben Brandon in the Chattanooga area serves. The SPLC considers League of the South and the Kershaw Foundation to be neo-Confederate hate groups. Okay, that's how it describes them. And by the way, there's a link in this story in the USA Today network that has 38 hate groups that operate in Tennessee. Well, I think what we can do, you, my listener, is what you have to do is just discount this kind of coverage and not be roused up by that. The goal of this effort by the cultural Marxists is to rouse resentment. And if we're going to have a prosperous local economy in Chattanooga and Hamilton County and beyond, which is our theme here on the David Tulis program at Nooga Radio, 92.7 FM, 95.3 HD4, and on AM 1240, the argument here is that we need to have a prosperous local economy, and it can only happen in a context of amity forgiveness and grace. These are, of course, Christian virtues. They come from the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ, as any Christian would tell you, right? Any Christian would tell you that that's what's taught in the Bible. And that is what is taught at church. Real community, right? The interest of community. Places, churches such as City Church have that as a towering theory among others. The problem, though, with the coverage is that that there's a hateful presentation. There's a connection in this story with another labor, that of homeschooling, quoting David Jones, and who is the president of the foundation. He got the money and was directed to be given for a homeschooling group, and he donated to a Christian school. Jones said, the judge did. Jones said in an interview, the check was written from the foundation to the school immediately. Of course, that's avoiding the inurement provisions of the IRS code, but done in good faith and done without there being any necessity of giving it. It was done by free will. And the judge is quoted in the very last paragraph of the story that got cut by the editor, right, in the print edition of the paper, I bet. Cut by the editor. I have a long history of supporting education, my community, and my profession, Eccles said in a statement, and will continue to give to organizations that make the world a better place. This is David Tulis, and our number is 800-8949, 800-8949. David Tulis here. You're live on the air. What's on your mind?
Good morning. This morning on First News America, or whatever it's called, from 6 to 9, until you can come on, that it emphasizes exactly what you're talking about. They're talking about the fact that he had an interview with a psychologist talking about how you would talk to your 10-year-old child about what went on in Charlottesville. And this woman referred to the statue as something like a pet or I'm trying to think of the word he used. But it was an icon for something else. She mentioned nothing in the conversation about the fairness of the free speech amendment for people to have their own opinion, whether you like it or not. She mentioned nothing about the fact that people's rights were infringed upon, because even though those people had a permit, these other people came in and created a problem. She mentioned nothing about how the Constitution of the United States was being discarded, and how we were going towards a country and an ideal of being told what to do, how to do it, and how to do it, as long as it was nice and peaceful and lovely. And we couldn't dispute anything that anybody said because it wasn't the way they felt. I thought that was appalling.
Well, I agree. There's no sense. We don't get a sense of the cause that these statues are there. Just that they're there. General A.P. Hill in front of the Hamilton County Courthouse is there, and he represents an evil cause. He represents the cause of slavery. He believes he wants the suggestion by the critics is that somehow these monuments, even today, make an argument for slavery. Well, they don't. They make an argument for a time past. They make an argument for character. They're not making the argument for slavery. But there are people who, if they get themselves worked up enough, if they listen to enough of the good press, they will become angry. And
it also disregards the fact that it was historical. It happened. Whether you want to believe it or not is another story. But the fact remains, it happened. It was part of what took place. And to deny that, and to use the word that she used, a mascot, that statue's not a mascot. It's a symbol of our country. Overall, it's freedom, it's the Constitution, it's history, it's all of those things rolled into one. And to deny those things is to change everything that we have ever been taught or thought about.
Well, listen,
and obviously, we're being taught that anymore.
You're making a good point. Think about this. The fact that we have General Hill in front of the county courthouse is a reminder of the old time. The old time did have slavery. A war was fought over slavery. And to not have a statue there is to help people to forget that there was a war, that there was slavery, that there was an emancipation, that there was the race of the black man, formerly slave, now free. If you take away the monuments, you take away the record. It is a kind of record. And of course, it's just very suggestive because it doesn't have any text with it. But it's just a picture of a man who lived in a time and was part of a conflict that ended up in the abolition of slavery, in at least chattel slavery in the South and elsewhere. And so to take, you think there should be this kind of memorial, right? Memorial means to remember, to bring to mind.
Back to something that you've said many times, the fact if you don't pay attention to history, you will repeat it. And if we don't have these reminders, we're going to repeat history and create an even bigger problem than the ones we already face. And I think that we should be aware of that, and we should not be standing down and letting the kumbaya people have their way and say, oh, well, yeah, maybe. And when reality is being shuffled to the sidelines and actually thrown out the window, and we have nothing to refer to and nothing to understand how to make things better in the long run.
Let me ask you a question. I was mentioning a moment ago the Tower of Babel. Now, remember that story in the Bible about the Tower of Babel? Do you remember what happened there?
Not right off.
Well, let me refresh your memory.
Facts sometimes.
Okay,
there's so many things going on in this world that I get.
Well, let me refresh your memory from the time you were in Sunday school and heard the story. God had separated men after the flood. Remember, men were supposed to disperse across the earth and take dominion. Remember that? But the problem was in the plain of Shinar, men gathered together and said, we need to come together. We need to make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we shall be scattered everywhere. We need to have a tower, a great city, and a tower which you can reach to heaven. And by the tower, what they wanted was centralization. They wanted a single central culture of them, with some of them at the top, of course, the elites. A single city with a great name and a great unity. They wanted unity, but when God saw that, he said, let us go down and confuse their tongues. And he did that because they were violating the rule of dispersal. They were violating the rule of creating independent cultures all across the earth at the time, of traveling far away, setting up new cities, building new civilizations. They were not doing that. They wanted to cohere and unite. And so God, angry at that disobedience, said, let's confuse their tongues. And what happened then, as you recall, was the creation of all the languages in one moment. And the fact that happened, there was no evolution of language from a single tongue. Language cannot be understood in terms of evolution, linguistic evolution. It didn't happen. But men, because they couldn't talk, split. They all went into different ways because they couldn't communicate. And I think what we have to listen. So let me ask you this: do you see in that problem of the Tower of Babel, men were told you have to disperse, you have to be different, you can't be alike, you can't get along because you don't speak the same language. In that,
we are naturally that way. Our bodies are different, even though they're the same. We all have different problems with our bodies. We have problems in our life. We see things differently. We go about doing the same task in different manners. Yes, that's very true. And it's a good point that I had slipped my mind about the different languages, because, again, if we were all the same, we would be homogenized to a point where we didn't have any differences. Existence wouldn't be necessary.
That's right. But here's the thing, though, that if you read more in the Bible, which I encourage you to do, you'll find out the following, that the work of humanity, as described there, is toward unity, but not a unity in rebellion, a unity rather under God. That is to say, under obedience to God, under his claims for mankind. And so the progress, and we can see this progress in the development of interpretation software, instant translation of language, breaking down the barriers that separate men. Language is one of them, right? And of course, ideas are another way by which men are divided. But the progress of humankind, according to Christianity, is toward increasing unity, toward increasing obedience to God over time, of course, over centuries. And the human race is, you might say, shifting its status from that under judgment of God toward that under God's blessing and redemption. That's of course, a long process that will take all of time, which is all of created time. But the promise is there will be this kind of unity that we're calling for today, but it can't come prematurely and it can't come by force.
Absolutely.
Well, listen, and what is your name, please?
Stan.
Stan, listen, I appreciate your call, and do keep tuned and tell a friend about my show, would you please?
We'll try.
Okay, thanks so much.
We'll do our best to spread this word. I'm looking for, believe it or not, a certain amount of confusion at the challenge tonight for this girl. I feel very bad about the fact that this girl was killed and murdered in that site, on that site. But by the same token, there are laws to deal with murder, and we don't need to unite under a single flag. And everybody says,
"All right, listen. Give me a call back tomorrow and tell me what happens at the event tonight. Would you please, Stan?"
Sure.
Thanks. And that's our theory here. You report in the world of science, David Tulis. Listen, we've got more to talk about. This question about the division of mankind at the tower and what's happening overall. We have to have unity, but it can't be by compulsion. There has to be dominion and not domination. Here in Chattanooga.
The Tennessee Valley's news, talk, and sports leader. Nooga Radio, AM 1240.